Sarah. Glad you can join us today. I am really excited to have Derek Friday, and I am not sure if you guys can hear the echo that I can hear, so I'd love to know if you can hear it in the chat. But if so, I can adjust things. But anyway, I'm really excited to have Derek. I've never had anybody on that has been an environmental designer, so I'm really excited about having him on. And I am. When I mute him, I can not hear myself. So I am gonna just play mute back and forth, Derek. So mainly it's gonna be me not talking, so you're gonna be talking. So anyway, I'm really excited to have Derek on, and I want you to give us a little bit of your background. And are you still hearing the echo now, guys? Just wondering because I have him muted while I'm talking, so we might just have to play this crazy game. Can you guys hear it now still? Maybe they'll tell me. Amy, Megan, Sarah, one of you, hopefully. Anyway, you'll tell me in a second, I guess. So I'm going to let Derek unmute, and if you could tell us a little bit about your background and where your interest in design came, and then we'll kind of get into more of how you got into environmental design. So let me unmute. Oh, maybe I can't unmute you. Can you unmute you? No echo. Great, thank you. Let's see. In the top, remember that bar above us?
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay. Awesome. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
We're good to go? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Derek Friday, and currently I'm broadcasting from Hamburg, Germany, but I live in Boulder, Colorado. And yeah, just where I am right now as far as design, I am an environmental graphic designer. My history really started back with architecture, traditional training in architecture, where I got my degree in environmental design, even though it was a 4-year architectural studio. And then after I graduated from college and started going into the design industry, I ended up working with a variety of different design firms, which ultimately led to environmental design, and we can talk about that later. I know that's a question for later on. But I think, you know, as a kid, just as a young boy, I was almost instantly kind of enamored and curious with design and art and creating, and I was always into something or making something, taking art classes, playing video games, watching Speed Racer animation, you know, obsessed with Atari and G.I. Joes and all the things that little boys in the 70s enjoyed. And I think I was just always curious about the way things were created or things that were designed, and I always excelled more in the sort of artistic, creative world, and maybe didn't have the attention span for a traditional sort of educational upbringing. But I think that sort of started me off early in the sort of creative disciplines. And it was around the time that I was maybe hitting my teen years that I realized that I really love design. I you know, becoming more interested in industrial design, house, and things like that. And my uncle was an architect. He was the only architect in the family. He worked and lived in Chicago. And our family traveled a lot to Chicago when I was young. They lived outside of the city in this beautiful area called Barrington. And they had a horse farm, and they had beautiful horses, and my uncle designed his house. And it was just a really special experience to be in the city and to see what he had built in this environment. And he was also involved with the Marina City Towers in Chicago, the 2 concrete cylindrical buildings that were right on the Chicago River, that are on the Chicago River. And he was instrumental in that process. And I think the combination of spending a lot of time in that city, even though I was raised in a city in Cincinnati, traveling back and forth to Chicago as a young child and experiencing that really started to influence me later. And I think that was sort of a pivotal sort of jump to wanting to be a designer or a creator in some capacity. But at the time, I didn't know where that was going to take me or how that was going to manifest itself. But it was definitely something in the creative world that I knew I wanted to ultimately do. So I think that's basically the way I got started thinking about design.
So I'm gonna mute you when I think I know how to unmute you, but you may have to unmute you each time. Sorry about that. So I want to know why environmental graphic design, and just if you could kind of give us a little understanding of what environmental graphic design is, just in case somebody doesn't know specifically, and then what calls to you about this area, because I also think it's just a really neat area. But great, I'm so glad to have everybody. Good to have you. All right, here we go. Can you unmute? Did you unmute?
Yeah, that's a question that a lot of people ask me, and it's still kind of difficult to explain because it's ever changing. But for me, environmental graphic design or environmental design is really sort of a culmination of all the other disciplines besides architecture and interior design and landscape design that helps inform an environment. It could be a retail store, it could be a shopping mall, it could be a restaurant. And environmental design usually includes, the branding of the project, and that could just, starting the process, that could be the naming of the project, the logo or identity of the project, and then sort of all the stuff that lives within the environment that helps communicate that brand more clearly. So it could come in the form of graphics, it could come in the form of patterning on the floors, it could come in the form of materials or textures that you're choosing for the interior environment or working with the interiors to help communicate that. It could come in the form of special features in the space, custom elements, but typically the way I've been working in retail environments, it comes in the form of two-dimensional graphics that sort of give the space, sort of pump the blood through the space. Not that the architecture doesn't do that, they're usually static environments, and the addition of environmental graphics and environmental design, I think, just sort of adds that last touch to the project that gives it a real pulse. And the way that I came to be interested in environmental graphic design, I think really it's that funny kind of, you realize what you don't want to do, and that's how you end up doing what you're doing. I mean, I loved being trained traditionally as an architect, but I knew almost right away that I didn't really want to be an architect. And I don't know, it wasn't because I didn't want to put in the hard work to ultimately be, a design architect where you can just draw something on a napkin and then someone else builds it. It wasn't that I wanted that, instant gratification, but I just don't think that I had the patience for executing, a building in the way that it needs to be done. It's very technical. It's very laborious. It's very linear. I tend to deviate and jump around a lot of different ways, and so I had this degree in architecture, and then I worked for traditional architectural offices, and then in the 90s, when there was a big financial crisis, early 90s in Chicago, where I was living, lots of firms were cutting staff back. So I was working in a lot of different offices. So I worked in interior design, I worked for residential architects, commercial architects, and I was starting to get all this experience. But I knew I never really fit in anywhere because the things that I was interested in were all the things that I either A, couldn't do, or they wouldn't allow me to do, or they didn't need. So ultimately, I ended up at this place in Boulder called Communication Arts, which was spawned from the Eames office. The partners of the firm, Richard Foy and Henry Beer, worked for Charles and Ray Eames in Venice, California, and that studio, they practiced architecture, interiors, furniture design, film, animation, graphic design, product design, branding, everything, and those ideas, and started their studio in Boulder, where I ultimately ended up. And that was the sort of experience of being like a kid in a candy store, because I was surrounded by all these talents and all these people practicing all these different disciplines. Graphic design and environmental graphic design and integrated branding were big components of that studio. And I loved it. I just loved being in that environment. I loved being around all these creative people and collaborating and creating these environments architecturally and interiors and graphics and everything to reach this sort of spirited finish to a project. So that's ultimately how I ended up realizing that I wanted to practice environmental graphic design and graphic design, traditional graphics, even though I wasn't, really formally trained to do that. So that's where things started for me as far as gaining experience and actually doing what I said I wanted to do.
So I'm muting you again. So I think it's really neat that you started doing this collaboration. You're combining. And I do think as designers we're kind of the translator in a way, but you're kind of in between the architect and the interior designer, and you're doing all this stuff. So I think that's really cool. So you've worked all over the world, and I want to get to show some of the work that you've done. And I think I'm going to pull up some stuff for this next bit. Let me go there quickly. And then I'm going to get you to unmute you, and then we're going to jump in. So the next one is you've worked all over the world on these amazing projects, which I'm so intrigued and jealous of. So many different types of projects. So which ones have been the most challenging and why? And you have to unmute you, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this was these couple of projects are one's really interesting. I know there's not a lot of visuals to discuss it, but we can talk about it quickly. The downtown, the two projects, to answer your question, that were probably the most challenging were the downtown Dubai project that is sort of centered around the Burj Khalifa, the current tallest building in the world. And the other project that was, a nightmare and really difficult was doing the signage standard for the U.S. Embassy. The Dubai project, which is sort of the more interesting one of the two, the reason why that was so difficult was because at the time I was working with RTKL in Baltimore and their ID8 group, which is now called the Environments Group. It was their sort of in-house environmental graphic design component to the company. And they were hired to create the experience for the boulevard that surrounded this downtown Dubai district. So it was a giant, brand new kind of in a city, again centered or built around the Burj Khalifa, the tall building, and we were basically asked to sort of create the experience of the boulevard. So imagine just like slapping down a circular road around this tall building and just come up with basically all the ideas more or less for what happens, how people are experiencing that. And the worst part about the process, or the most challenging part about the process, was that we needed to sort of direct and organize a variety of other consultants, from the landscape designers to the lighting designers to the architects to the traffic engineers to the all the sort of technical people. We were the ones that had to sort of organize and direct all of these different consultants that were from all over the world, and they're wondering, why are these guys from Baltimore, Maryland in charge of this project? Why are they telling us what to do? There was language barriers, there were cultural barriers, there were discipline barriers, and it worked out in the end, but it was just a really big, and I was designer and was sort of there as like a secondary or tertiary support, but it was still a great experience to see the way that big engine needed to run, and but in the end, it's nice to have been connected to a major project that's built here in that's built in the Emirates. So yeah, that was and you probably have a little couple sketches or storybook drawings. I don't know if you still have those, but the final deliverable for that project was a booklet that sort of summarized everything that was done in that project. And we needed to create a book that basically had all the disciplines work and the sort of logic behind everything. So orchestrating all these disciplines, orchestrating all of these teams, and producing a deliverable book that summarized it all was a big, giant effort. The second part of the question, and a lot more boring, the U.S. Embassy, working with any government agency is just unbelievably exhausting. First of all, we had to go through all kinds of security clearances, and the firm needed to be vetted by the government, and interviewed, and FBI background checks, and the works just to be able to work on this. But the reason for this project was that the United States embassies were being relocated from traditional city centers to the outskirts, basically where they were undeveloped, so that they could build new embassies that were in secure areas that had large sort of distances between the buildings and civilization for blast radius purposes and security purposes and such. And then in doing all of that, they were redoing all their signage. It sounds like it would have been fun, wave signage for embassies, but it was very formulaic, very boring. It was just not. It was definitely one of the challenging and boring projects that I've done. I think that image that you're showing there is the sort of study of the booklet idea for the Burj Dubai, or the downtown Dubai deliverable, and then the next couple images were just my maniacal cartooning of every single page, and also organizing all the other consultants' work to put into this booklet. So we were the authors of this master novel, and these people were already mad at us anyway because they didn't really like working with us, and there were lots of fights, lots of angry consultants. So yeah, so I'd say those are the big challenges. I mean, every project is a challenge, of course, but those two, when you sent me that question, I really wanted to think about it and see if I could come up with, maybe challenging can be replaced with annoying or exhausting, but they're good experiences to kind of draw from.
So Megan wants to know how many people was your team from Baltimore?
Oh, that's a good question. There was like 4 of us. So we were these 4 people that were showing up in Dubai all the time in big conference rooms with like 40 other people just looking at us, wondering, how we were going to understand what they were doing and how we were possibly going to be able to orchestrate this. But I mean, we earned their respect, and it ended up being a really nice, nice project and nice deliverable. So yeah, but a big bureaucracy of people.
Yeah, I can imagine. All right, so I'm muting you again. So I'm hoping that this whole thing will be okay, Derek. Sorry about that. I think we're just getting a little feedback. So you have a love for history, which I think would be great. I think it's great for me when I'm doing a project that helps with research. It helps to kind of but there's so many other things when you're working overseas, right? And I would think that would be different, and I know that's number 5, so I'm going to go back to number 4. But so you have this love of history, and you have this insatiable curiosity. So if you guys follow Derek on Instagram, you're going to see these amazing, I just love them. So can't wait to show you. I think that's kind of some of the next images are some of that from there, but or maybe we're skipping. But you have this insatiable curiosity, which obviously makes a great place to get ideas. But what are your first steps? Because it sounds like you're really planned out, and you have to talk and deal with a lot of other designers or architects or other people that are involved, the stakeholders in the company or whatever. So what are your first steps to be able to kind of hone in what you're doing? Because I cannot wait to show you guys more of his work. All right, unmute yourself.
Yeah, that's I mean, I guess if I could apply that question to like a current example, for instance, with the company that I'm basically a steady freelancer with is ECE, based here in Hamburg, and they do retail projects all over Europe. working in China now also. Typically, they've already gone through a round or two of design for a project, and then the way that it's worked for me is that I usually get handed, this sort of half-baked set or half-baked set of ideas that the board of directors of the company have sort of rejected, or the senior designer or senior architects of the company have rejected, and oftentimes I'm brought in to fix the problem somehow. I guess that's a nice thing to be able to do, but there's a lot of pressure in that sometimes. So I usually get some set of information that usually comes in the form of some local history stuff. I mean, basic stuff like Wikipedia research and demographics of the customer, or the types of demographic in the region and things like that. So that's usually the way I sort of start, and then in most cases I get to travel to these places. So in the case of ECE projects, most of them are in Germany, so I'll travel to some small German town, and I usually go with a German colleague, probably someone that maybe even lived in that state of Germany, so they know that region a little bit better. This is just a very specific example. It's not always this way. This is a good scenario. So we'll travel to the project if it exists, because lots of times it does exist. Projects are refurbishments or sort of rebranding of an existing project. Or if it's a new project, we'll still go to the site and just see the culture. But usually sort of that first immersion of the place. So you go to the location, you walk around town, you go to restaurants, you go to shops. I mean, you go to the library, as much time as you have to sort of dig into the local culture. So that's really the sort of first sort of way that you start to get information. But then what I like to do is sort of, I like to say, dig a little bit deeper and find, obviously some things that are contextually or culturally related to the project, but then try to take it like another couple levels, maybe another couple levels of abstraction, have 2 or 3 or 4 ideas that sort of tell a story that's relatable to the project, and then start developing ideas. And the best way to do that is to kind of share that direction with your team or your collaborators or the art director or the design director, so that you're not going down the wrong road. But that's usually the way I like to approach that, because when you're doing just basic research through Wikipedia or the internet or whatever, you end up getting information that everyone basically knows, and the culture certainly knows, and they're not looking for you to just hand them back that same information. You get a screen that you read, and then you reinterpret it or redistill it so that it's rethought and fresh, but still relatable. So some people that are really knowledgeable of the region or the history might be able to sort of see, what's happening, and other people just might think it's just really nice, pleasant design and don't relate it back, draw it back to some historical reference. So that's sort of the way that's the way I get started.
So what about, how do you handle cultural differences? Because you're not working in just Germany, which would culturally, there's definitely differences, but it's not maybe as different as working in Dubai or in China or something like that. So can you talk a little bit about, I think you have kind of other like cultural translators that you work with, right? And you'll have to unmute yourself again, sorry. I just don't know if you can talk to them.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Again, that's, I mean, China and the Emirates are definitely more difficult than Germany or Europe, because you're dealing with totally different languages altogether, different letterings, different alphabets, different translations. But in most cases, and this company that I work for is a multinational company, so there are people here from all over the world. English is the primary language, but I'm almost always paired with someone on the team that has a connection to the culture or speaks the language or something like that. But yeah, I mean, it can be really, really difficult. And I think I was sort of telling you, I gave you an example a couple weeks ago where, just like in Germany, there's, if you like sausages and potatoes and cabbage and sourdough and things like that, there's certain, sausages that are only produced in certain parts of Germany. And if you eat these sausages, then you can only use this mustard that's from this part of Germany. Because if you would ever even consider using, a different kind of mustard or drinking a different kind of beer with this, that's just, everyone knows that that's just not the thing. It's very clear the way that you do it. And I find that to be the case with a lot of other sort of cultural attributes when you're designing. So you always need to make sure that you have someone that you can vet these ideas with, because if you want to pay tribute to some industry in a German town as part of your design project, you think you're going down the right path, and then all of a sudden somebody that's maybe from that area say, oh no, that really sends a bad message. People don't want to remember how difficult it was, so you just celebrate this plant that everyone loves to eat the fruit from, or something like that. I mean, it gets really, really specific, and you can really kind of misstep if you don't do due diligence and connect with the right people. And Arabic countries, I mean, that's just a totally other ball of wax. You have to be really careful with patterning, has really distinct meanings, and it's just China, like every province in China has different historical, I mean, it's not unlike things in the South are different than things in the North in the United States, or California does something different than New York. I mean, it's very much like that, but you don't worry so much about making the mistakes in your own country, but you really could come across looking silly if you started to suggest to a client something that's culturally way off base. So, and I've learned my lesson a lot on that, and I have examples that I definitely don't want to share. So it's something to be aware of.
Okay, so I think Joe wanted you to share one of those. He's like, have you ever made one of those cultural missteps or cultural mistakes? So obviously he has, and he doesn't want to share.
I'll get you, Joe. Let's put it this way. It was for a project in Dubai, and it was a project in Kuwait. I was doing naming studies for this project that was ultimately named 360 Kuwait, and one of my names was the sort of ultimate happy place for a different religion, and it would have been seen as a really poor choice. So I'll just leave it at that. And I remember sharing it with my art director, and he was like, "No, I don't want to do that. That would not be good at all." So. But when you're doing these naming studies for projects, you just sort of are just coming up with as many names as possible, and it was just on the list, and I thought it sounded really cool, so it made it to the final list for the presentation, and it quickly got moved before it was too late. So it's things like that. So yeah, I just want to leave it at that.
So one thing is that you're really, I always, the more I talk to people, and I've talked to Derek last year, and then I've talked to him, more recently a couple times. So I think one of your superpowers, I think everybody has superpowers, right? But one of yours is your flexibility, because you can work and you communicate well, obviously, with people, and culturally as well as just people. Like, you pick up on things, you're intuitive. So I think that's another one of your superpowers that must help you in doing work like this, and doing work with kind of being a freelancer and kind of fitting into a lot of different, because it's not just you go into a design firm and you just do your design. You actually have to work with other people consistently and constantly, and you really like this. But there's another part of you. So you're curious, which I think is a great superpower, and when you're humble, you're always ready to learn, and you always think that you have lots left to learn, which is great. You definitely have expertness, but you wear that really well. You want to talk a little bit? I know I didn't ask it like I wrote it, but so why do you enjoy collaborating with other people so much in that collaboration process, and how do you fit into an already existing team? How would somebody use you?
Yeah. Well, I think I like to say this a lot because it's true. I mean, I don't really have an agenda or an ego when it comes to designing or grading. I've never really been that way. And in this field, you do work with a lot of people that push that agenda, or can be overpowering with their ego or their position. And I've always sort of felt like the more smart people that I can surround myself with, the better the experience. And when it comes to creating, our job is to satisfy who's ever paying us, right? And so I've always felt like, the more I can create with smart, talented, collaborative people, the better the results will end up being. And I am my own as a freelancer, designing and working projects, and I made that choice to work on my own. But to be with a group of people or 2 or 3 people in a room working on a problem is way more satisfying, because that way we were sharing information, sharing thoughts, and really coming up with the best solution. I think when I worked at RTKL and Baltimore, I was shipped around a lot between the Chicago, Dallas, and London offices, because our service, sort of environmental graphic designers, wasn't firm-wide. We were only in a few locations, so they shared us. So I constantly got to go to other design studios and with 2 or 3 on a team, and really started to get that feeling of what it was like to hop, skip, and jump around, and work with people and develop all these relationships and work on all these different projects. And I home in that environment. And it's also good not to work with the same people all the time that you eventually sort of, can get frustrated with, or get sick of, or you just need that sort of fresh mind. So as far as plugging into teams, I think just my of working in all these different disciplines, architecture, interiors, graphics, branding, integrated branding, signage, and wayfinding. I'm able to sort of plug myself into a lot of different types of teams on a lot of different types of projects, because I have this sort of varied, jack of all trades, master of some sort of sensibility, and with a focus on environmental graphic design and branding. So I can usually go into a team situation and say, oh, what if we did this, or maybe we should do this, or maybe we could do that. That's part of the process that they weren't ever thinking of, while still being able to talk shop, architecturally or interiors wise. I always manage to find, my way into a team like that. So it's nice.
So one of the things, so that kind of is like that whimsy that you get to add in, and you bring this into a lot of projects, and actually a lot of people will ask you to keep that in or to bring that in, and I want you to definitely talk about that. I think the next images we have are the Instagram stuff, and like I mentioned before, Derek has this amazing, I just love it, and it's so tactile to me. It's like something I can taste. So I want to show you some of those images. And so you seem to always be able to keep the whimsy in. And can you kind of describe why that's important, and then maybe kind of segue into the Instagram, and then you tell me when. I'm going to pull up the first Instagram, and then you tell me when to switch slides, so that people can kind of get an idea. Because I think that's a good way. This is just a side project that doesn't always show up in your final pieces, but things feed in, and that Instagram stuff that you're doing really it does affect and infect your work, I think.
Diane, can you repeat that question for me again? I didn't hear all that. Sorry.
That's okay. So what I was saying was about the whimsy and being able to, I'm pretty much asking number 7, the whimsy that you add into your work, and then if you could also kind of segue into the Instagram. Unmute?
Yeah. So yeah, I'm good. I think as far as like the whimsy is concerned, I mean, it also kind of goes back again to the sort of ego agenda thing. But I've also always like to say that, you know, I have this sort of self-awareness that what we're doing as designers, at least in my specific field, we're not, you know, we're not saving anyone's life. We're not, you know, we're not doctors, we're not teachers, we're not farmers, we're not saving the world by creating, you know, print graphics or environmental graphics and shopping malls or making a restaurant look cooler or things like that. But at the same time, we're passionate about what we do and we love doing what we're doing, and you try to do it as well and as good as you possibly can. So I do take it seriously, but at the same time, I kind of always check in with myself and realize that, you know, it's not really that important at the end of the day, but it's fun. And I think you know, my personality is also sort of, and personality naturally allows me to add sort of whimsy and humor into what we're doing, just, you know, not taking yourself so seriously. And last year I worked on this project in South Denver called Southwest Plaza, and I was doing some research. I really wanted to develop language for this project in Colorado, as opposed to sort of following the lead of all these projects in Colorado that had this sort of mountain vernacular, sort of the same building materials, same aesthetic. It was just sort of overdone, and everyone kept following the lead, and it just, the style was really getting tired. So I was really interested in being in Hamburg a lot in Northern Europe. I'm almost on the Danish border, and we've always had a love for Scandinavian countries and Nordic culture and so forth. So it started to develop this sort of new language for this project, sort of more Northern Scandinavian sensibility. And their big sort of mantra in design is simplicity, honesty, and playfulness. These 3 words that these designers, this sort of new school of designers in Northern Scandinavia were using as their sort of mantra. And that really resonated with me because it was a lot of the way I believe design should be: simple, honest, and you know, whimsical or delightful. I mean, one of the things we do as designers when we create spaces is you know, provide unexpected moments, or you know, create delight. You know, things that just make you really happy. You know, if you go to a restaurant, or if you go to a retail shop, or if you go to a public place and there's all these things that just make you smile and make you happy, that's injecting spirit and delight into a place, which makes it's just a good thing. So I think that's sort of, you know, the way I feel about, you know, these principles are what I like to apply when I work on a design problem, for sure. And then as far as like the Instagram thing, which I know is kind of a big jump, I mean, Instagram has really been a forum for me that allows me to sort of create, do mini creations, I suppose, and communicate ideas, share ideas, celebrate some of my own projects and so forth. But I've always had interest in photography, not, you know, like on any kind of serious level, but I love taking images, I love manipulating images, I love capturing cool sort of abstractions of things. You know, I always don't want to take pictures with people in them and things like that. I like to hone in on details and so forth. And I guess about a year ago, I started getting into manipulating certain images and either editing them or kind of taking them apart and putting them back together, or adding graphics or overlays on top of them. And I was trying to think of what it is exactly that I'm doing or what they really mean. If there was some kind of artist statement for the way these look or what they mean, I would say they're sort of like these like photographic tattoos in a way. They're these like moments in time where I'm combining like a couple of things that at that time or at that week or at that month was something that visually I was really interested in, and that the overlay and the manipulation of the image then culminates some kind of story that I can remember. The one that's there in front of you is a historic photo of Boulder from above, and Boulder has been working really hard to position itself as this sort of like modern Mecca, modern like in a traditional modern way, with design and contemporary design and sort of retro and historical design. It's started a couple magazines. They have a lot of conferences now. This October is the month of modern in Boulder, which is celebrating all these mid-century homes, and Design Within Reach has a shop there, and a new magazine called Alpine Modern has just come to be, and lots of people are writing about it and so forth. So I think this particular one was sort of maybe in a way kind of knocking that notion a little bit, because it's not quite there yet, but it's on its way. So injecting a little whimsy, but and I also just like to sort of see how these combinations and compositions come together. And Instagram is very easy to curate, so you can just put your most beautiful images in there. None of the outtakes ended up in my feed, but this particular shot is a barn that's just right around the corner from my house, looking west towards the Front Range, but then overlaid with a pattern of a Heritage de Meuron building in Basel, Switzerland. And I had just visited the texture and the pattern of it, and I think I was just trying to create some juxtaposition between this sort of calm, agricultural, peaceful setting mixed with the contemporary treatment of architecture. So
I love
it's mumbo jumbo like that. Well, you can have it.
So you took both pictures?
They're really fun. I did take both pictures, yeah. And sometimes they are found images, but in this case, they're both images. Yeah. And the app that I used I do it in Photoshop lots of times, but I also use this app that I really like called Union, which if people are interested in doing this kind of thing, Union is a really nice, clean and simple app that allows you to layer on top of one another, manipulate them, and do a lot of basic editing stuff. So
I really like this one too, the fern.
Yeah, I was trying to remember what I was thinking on that one, and I can honestly tell you I don't remember. But I like the retro sort of quality of the. I tend to like sort of vintage advertising or advertising, in like the 60s or late 50s, early 60s era. And the one thing that I wanted to mention about photography is that the sort of my interest in photography definitely sort of transitioned into like 60s and 50s era films like Alfred Hitchcock, and I was always really intrigued by the way Hitchcock shot his films and set design and the colors and the costumes and the graphics and everything that's part of these stories that are being told. I was influenced by.
What I like about this one, maybe our echo's not happening. So I like this one because it's so simple. The building is pretty busy, and then you have these two lines that are just coming through. I just think it's powerful, and I think that's when we get to look at your work, which is next. Not just your Instagram awesome combos, but
thanks.
I think that simplicity really comes out. I think it's hard to do things so simple sometimes.
I don't know if the images are stuck on my end. I'm still looking at the barn image with the sort of pattern on top of it. But the one that I think you're talking about, yeah.
if you click on that thing at the bottom,
Yeah.
and you, Derek, can like pull different things on our big screen. If you click
Oh,
it,
I
can
see.
you see it on the big screen? It's the
Oh, yeah.
motorcycle now with the two stripes.
Yeah. 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 Definitely, I probably show a lot of old vintage BMWs or sort of 70s era BMWs, or this is a concept. Um, but these stripes are showing up a lot, and the sort of genesis of the stripes is from some projects that I've been working on in Northern Europe, sort of near the Baltic Sea and the North Sea, and doing a lot of nautical flag sort of research and the sort of striping of flags. And in this case, I think it was around the time that I'd seen the Amy Winehouse documentary, and I wanted to sort of make the stripes a little bit prettier and more feminine, so they ended up with a color. But usually it's sort of an overlay. This just ended up being just one little sort of basic sort of gesture that's layered across the imagery.
So I'm gonna kind of jump to a couple next questions because we don't have a ton of time, and I want to like make sure I get some of
Yeah.
your work up there. So
Okay.
some of your work seems very forward thinking and really brave, and I think, how do you sell the client on some of those ideas? So and I guess you can talk about, I think the next set of images we have are where you draw your inspirations from, and I think sometimes that's maybe part of the sell, but I'm going to go to the next images, but I'm going to bring you up top.
Okay.
Oh, so the sands.
Okay. So I'm going to go to.
Oh, whoops.
Yeah. So the Bethlehem Steel project. I know I need to sort of move quickly. The Bethlehem Steel project is in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and the Sands Casino in Las Vegas actually bought some of the site. The whole site is going to be master planned with lofts and residential and workspaces. PBS has a broadcasting facility there. But these are images of the buildings that are on site that I was able to visit. They're all abandoned. You know, the burners turned off at the steel plant in the early 70s, or sorry, in the early 90s. And it basically just they turned the burners off and everyone just left, and it looks like everything is still in its place. So it's this abandoned sort of massive site of all these industrial buildings. That's the master plan of or part of the master plan of the project that I worked on, the casino, the hotel, and the retail project. But basically, I was able to go to this site and act like an archaeologist almost and study all the buildings. I could walk anywhere I wanted to. I was inside the burners, the blast furnaces, where all the machinery was, and seeing all these beautiful machines. And these spaces were large enough for them to construct and deconstruct entire bridges or ships, because they needed to build them and deconstruct them in the spaces and then ship them out. Those are the blast furnaces where they would melt the ore to create the steel. This was just a nice check back into reality piece of graffiti that I'd seen. From the faces to the dials to the color palettes to the materials. This is an ore crane that brought in the raw ore onto the site that they reused for the final product. But basically, what we did was we drew inspiration from all of these elements on the site to create what really ended up being a really lovely project. That's the parking structure that's glowing hot orange color as if the furnaces were still burning. They salvaged the ore crane and built this beautiful structure at the base to hold it. And then the task was to do signage and wayfinding for this part of the site, to direct people coming into the project to find their way to the parking structure and inside the casino to go gamble, and then the shopping mall, and ultimately stay in the hotel. So if that's your cup of tea for the weekend, you can do that. But the directional signage was, real heavy-handed concrete bases with this industrial coloration and typeface, so it felt sort of like it, it lived in the site as far as an industrial sort of standpoint, strong strong aesthetic on the directional arrows and the type and such. This was a feature that sort of, this is a good example of environmental graphics that sort of manifest themselves three-dimensionally. These are light fixtures that are in the lobby of the casino, but thematically they're to represent when they harden the steel. They would dip these long pieces of steel into a water bath to harden the steel process. And these are elements that they're delightful, whimsical, sort of memorable elements in the lobby space that people would think are just cool. It's a cool light fixture, but the people that live in Bethlehem, that their families used to work at the steel mill, would be like, oh, I know what they're doing there, and hopefully they thought it was a nice gesture instead of sort of ripping off, their livelihood in a poorly executed way. Hopefully they enjoyed them, but so this is a good example of that.
I think that's awesome. And Joe wants to know, where would somebody go to learn more and get involved in environmental graphic design?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a discipline that smaller agencies are doing all over the country. But if you want to sort of try to get into the industry and sort of learn from a more established environment, the larger firms like RTKL or Gensler or HA or Callison or some of these big firms that have 5, 6, 10 offices worldwide typically have this kind of discipline in their services, and they're working on projects like baseball stadiums or large shopping malls or big mixed-use development projects that need a lot of branding and signage and graphics and things like that. So the image on the right is actually part of the new project, and you can see that RTKL was the architecture firm that did the design work. Really were careful in creating these buildings to really feel like they're permanent and that they belong on the site. And by the way, they're not demolishing all those old buildings. They're keeping all those old buildings, which is really nice. So it sort of made me feel better about working on a project that was a casino, because it's not my favorite type of new project, but this one was successful.
So you also have a really unique space personally where you work in Boulder. I know you're in Hamburg now, but talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, so this is my little studio, and I like to call it my holding cell. It's like big enough for me to do push-ups in if I was a prisoner. And we carved this space out of my son's bedroom, and it's right off of our bedroom, so it's easy to fall right into bed after working really late. But essentially, it's sort of built around this this desk. That's an Eames case study desk that's pushed against the wall there, and installed a window and created this space. And behind me is my books and my toys, and I basically just have what I need. And I know one of your questions is, how does this help me work? And I struggled with that answer a little bit, but then I realized, in this basically just have what I need. It helps keep things simple and clear when I'm working on a project. Things get really crazy in there when I tape wall a few drawings. I don't have a big pin-up wall. I don't have a whiteboard. Everything pretty much happens laptop and my Thunderbolt display, and it's just a nice place to go to and get my work done, and my dog sits underneath my feet, and it's just a pleasant place to be. But it's really nice to get out of that environment and work in a coffee shop or in the backyard or here in Hamburg or a friend's house or something like that. So, but it's a nice little space.
So I'm going to mute you again because I kept hearing myself the last time. So I want you to talk about the last 5 minutes. I want you to talk about the Marmara. Well, you'll tell me in a minute. The project, and it's really big, and it seems kind of like the Sands project in a way. I mean, it's really intensive and it's really large. It was a really different prompt so you're getting all these things kind of from all over. So how how do you start from something like that? And can you kind of walk us through this project? And it'll kind of be fast, I know, but I'm going to show the pictures and you can walk us through. Unmute.
Okay. Well, the Marmara Park project is in Istanbul, Turkey, and we had a chance to be there quite a bit, so we're really embedded into the culture. Istanbul is sort of east meets west. It's a city of 14 million people. It's a mega city. Europe and Asia are just connected by the Bosphorus Bridge that you see there, and it's a multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnic, multi-extravaganza of a city. It's just fantastic. ECE bought a property, a piece of land about 30 miles outside of the city center, where the catchment area of people is still like 4 or 5 million people, and the catchment area means the people that would come to this shopping project. 4 million people are within like a 15-minute drive of the space. This is basically their design that they handed to us. They bought the piece of property and they designed a building that looked sort of like this, or looked like this, but the building had no soul, it had no life or no theme or no story. And so they hired me and 2 other colleagues this is the side view of sort of what they handed us. They hired us to come up with a concept. And they said to us they wanted a space-themed project, and my first thought was, oh no, space-themed project is going to warrant something really awful, like a little boy's bedroom that's themed like a space project. So if you go to that next image, or maybe
No, I'm there. I think they can see it.
They asked, yeah, right. Yeah, so this is sort of what I envisioned, and I was really nervous about it. So we quickly had to come up with a concept for space, a rocket in the middle, and strong space colors. But it was all that sort of like quintessential space-themed stuff that predictable things. Mm-hmm. And we did this quickly in hopes that we could do something else. So we asked if we could try a different concept because we didn't want to do the space project. So we quickly and this all happened in about a weekend. We quickly came up with 2 other themes, and this one we really wanted to do. This was the adventure theme project, maybe with a giant LED panel in the front of the building, like a live feed from Everest. It was maybe like an REI kind of experience with a climbing wall and all kinds of cool stuff. And then the other concept that we came up with that our hearts weren't quite as into was what we call this color theme. And this may have been a little bit more difficult to program, but it was just another theme altogether. So we're thinking, okay, great, we have space, we have adventure, and we have color. Maybe they're like, nope, we still want a space-themed project. So we're like, okay, this is what we have to do. And then they put all this extra pressure on us, saying that they needed it to be incredible because they needed all this money from investors to make the project happen. This is typically the way EC works, where they need other investors to help the project, and not in all cases, but in this case, it was a lot of money. So we started to look at Stanley Kubrick in 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the sort of like science and religion behind science fiction, and all these other attributes to space and nebula and other worlds, but not the quintessential space-themed stuff that was predictable and expected. And started to develop this vernacular, this language that was just visually a little bit more interesting than the typical sort of stuff that you would think comes out of a space project. And in order to communicate the story, we had to write and illustrate a graphic novel. And the graphic novel was called The Voyages of Marmara Galaxy, and it was about this otherworldly creatures that were looking for the perfect spot on Earth to relocate their spaceship retail project. And they were flying all over the universe, and they were trying to find the perfect location. And Istanbul, Turkey, satisfied all their demographic criteria and whatnot. And they flew through town, and they landed this project onto the site, and shocked and happy to see this new thing coming, and everyone was really excited, and it had all these cool features, and blah, blah. So
Oh no. Are you there? Bookers. Anyway,
novel, as you can imagine, was like a bright, colorful, exciting idea.
okay.
It was an interesting, sort of special part of their communication of the project. Novel in it. It was a deliverable that the people could take away at this conference. But we got into everything. We designed the panel on the spaceship, and the center of the panel of the spaceship had this area where the alien dropped this key, and this is a realization of that key form that started the engines to the spaceship to land onto the site in Istanbul. So we really got to think about this thing, and this is before we really designed it. So this part, where this is great, but we need more. What we're not going to see, we ended up doing an animated graphic novel. So we worked with a post-production company in Istanbul to actually animate the graphic novel that we produced. So there was a movie that was made with sound, and the things moved, and it's a really fun experience. Sort of taking an idea and distilling it and translating it in a way that was sort of unexpected, and it turned out to be a big hit. Everyone was really excited about it, again, without even really seeing any designs. They just loved the idea that this space-themed project was going to happen in Istanbul. And again, Istanbul is a city of 14 million people. They had plenty of other shopping projects, and it made sense to have a crazy, otherworldly, out-of-this-world, nutty project because there's so many people and so much space there that they could pull this off. I mean, right up the street was a ski-themed project. So this is the way it turned out. This is the exterior of the building with like a large format image of a nebula and the sort of like scientific patterning that's sort of layering across. But the basic form of the building stayed the same as what they originally had intended. We got to adjust some of the colors on the exterior. These are all just metal panels that are pretty typical construction of buildings of this scale. So the building, really ended like a spaceship anyway. So we had that going for us. Where we could really affect things was on the interior, because that was just more or less an open shell.
This is cool.
So here's where. Yeah, this is where we start to see some of the interior, and we were doing these really cool things in the ceiling where we opened up the gypsum board with lighting, and those were sort of these glyphs. We developed this sort of glyph kind of characters that were sort of alien-like language, and these patterns and forms started to get layered across, a lot of the surfaces. These are pretty typical applications for ECE projects where large wall surfaces are adorned with graphics and patterns and so forth. So this starts to feel like the inside of a ship, and the colors and the graphics. These are the corridors that go back to the restroom that start to reference what it feels like a ship of some sort. And those are portals that look into the space.
So then this. Oh.
And are you able to advance to the next? There's, I think, a couple more.
Okay. This is the rocket. Is this the rocket?
Yeah, I think I'm still seeing the same image. Okay, there we go. So in the center space there is. Yeah, in the center space there is, in fact, a rocket. That was part of our original idea, and they wanted a rocket, but we took the design inspiration from this sort of like retro, 20s, 30s era science fiction, where the rocket has a little bit more of a kind of a gothic sort of feel to it. It doesn't look as traditional, and the lines just sort of feel a little bit more modern and unexpected. So every chance we got to sort of change up the quality of what was, interpreted as a space theme, we wanted to abstract it as much as we could. And the rocket looks like it's actually shooting out of the center of the space. It's pretty dramatic. And I think they put like a coffee kiosk or something in the middle, which is really typical of any kind of retail project. They lease every last surface of the space, so it doesn't get to stay clean and pristine. And these are graphics that live on the bulkheads and on the underside of the bridges to feel like they're moving or illuminated. There is some motion graphic and LED lighting that animates in the space, but this is static stuff. These projects are all typically large-scale format print graphics are on these large wall surfaces.
So Derek, I'm going to mute you. It seems like you love pattern. I know we're over time, but like this is so, like Tressa was saying, I love how encompassing this is. And they built she asked, so they built the building without an overall idea of theme. And so I'm not sure how old the building was. It doesn't look like it was that old, but maybe they bought it and they just had an idea. So it does seem sort of odd, but it seems perfect for the space theme. Of course, it does seem really cool for the like REI kind of outdoor adventure. That one would have been really cool too. But can you how that must happen a lot where there's a repurposing in a way, kind of like the thing in the Sands, where you're repurposing these old industrial, but you're still giving them some of that life. And I think that's what you're so good at. I'm unmuting, or you are going to unmute.
Yeah, the building actually wasn't built. The building actually wasn't built. What they did was they bought the land and they developed a set of actual drawings that they could use for permit to actually build the building itself. So when I said this is what they gave us, that was a visualization, just a rendering of what they originally thought the building would look like without a theme or without a concept. So in order to push that project through and to get investor money to make it actually happen, they needed to have a real idea that they could sell to the investors to get that extra money to then realize the project. So by giving it a space theme project and developing all these ideas through the graphic novel and some of the other things, that pushed the project forward so that they had funding to do it. And we then produced a package of design concepts that made it this space-themed project. So that project. But you're right, the Sands project, that was also a brand new building that was built on a site with a bunch of older buildings that they are.
Did we lose you?
Projects like what you're seeing now are brand new projects from the ground up or renovated existing projects that they've had in their portfolio.
So I will just have to do a part two. Hello? Derek. Let's see. I don't know if I can. We'll have to do a part two because there's so much to see, and I know there's so much more. So I want to give everybody your ways to get in touch with you. You can follow him on Instagram at Derek Friday, and you can also check him out on elo.co/Findustry, FINNDUSTRY. So check him out, follow him, see his awesome Instagram stuff. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I love environmental graphic design. I don't really do much, if any. I've done tiny little pieces, nothing like Derek, but it is that whole space, and it is those places of surprise, and I always love things like that when I go to a restaurant or a retail space or some sort of environment where they've all the nooks and crannies and these special little things that not everybody's going to see. So I just really like it, and I really like you, Derek, so I'm excited to have you on always. So we'll just schedule a part two to finish it up. But thank you for coming. I hope you guys, I do need to do a show on ELO. Johnny, but I'm going to give you back the mic, so talk a little bit, and then if you want it to say any closing, and Tressa says she enjoyed the multicultural stuff too, and I totally agree. All right, and thank you so much. You can unmute you, so you can talk.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Diane. I really had a great time, and it was fun to share some of these stories. Yeah, you're right. There's so much more to talk about, and so many other projects, but no, get through all. I'm sure people will be bored eventually. So, but I really appreciated the time to do this, and it was a lot of fun. And I appreciate all your kind words about my superpowers. And thanks everybody for listening. And hopefully, I'll collaborate with one of you out there at some point or cross paths. And thank you very much.
And I think
good night from Hamburg.
Yeah, I think Derek's gonna try and go to Creative South, so maybe we'll get to see him there. And anyway, I'm super excited to meet him in person. I have a pull to Colorado anyway, so I'm excited to have a Colorado person coming from there. Anyway, next week's kind of up in the air. I can't remember if I'm doing a rapid recharge or if I'm having a guest. I'm trying to get somebody who was doing some touring around, and I'm trying to make a spot for her. So hopefully it'll either be her or me. So I'll hopefully see you back here next week, and I'll send you an update on what we're doing. But definitely check Derek out. And Derek, thank you so much. Thanks for coming and doing it even when you're in Germany. So I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you next week.